Let's now move on and discuss a very important scripting component, conditionals. We've seen conditionals in several scripts that we've worked with thus far. These are those statements that check whether some condition is true or false and then acts on that discovery. In fact, we've encountered a conditional in our very first script, Basic Navigation. We used a conditional to check which button in our menu had been clicked and then to move the playhead to the appropriate frame. Back here in our very first script, we have a series of buttons with event listeners attached to each button. And then when the event listener triggered that a button had been clicked, it runs this function, handle click, which then checks to see which button has been clicked with these series of if statements. If the target is page 1, then go to the page 1 frame label and stop. If the target was page 2, then go to the page 2 frame label and stop. ActionScript 3.0 actually provides 3 basic conditional statements that you can use to check for various conditions and then pass on these conditions to control the program flow. The if-else conditional statement allows you to test a condition and then execute a block of code if that condition exists, or to execute an alternative block of code if the condition does not exist. For example, if we only had 2 buttons in our menu here, we could use an if-else structure to script the menu instead of using all these repeating if statements. The code would look something like this. Let's go to the bottom here and add some more space. And now let me paste in the code. If p-event-target equals page 1, then do this. If not, then do this. In other words, if we only had 2 buttons, so the condition always had to be either one or the other, this script is a little bit more compact. Also, if you don't want to execute an alternative block of code, you can also use the if statement without the else statement, as we did here in our first example. You can also test for more than one condition at a time using something that the ActionScript reference refers to as if-else-if conditional statement. For example, this code here not only tests whether the value of x exceeds 20, but also tests whether the value of x is negative. Let's go down to the bottom and let me paste in this example code right here. This statement here says if x is greater than 20, then trace x is greater than 20. Else, if x is less than 0, trace x is negative. You can also use a switch statement to test the condition of your program flow. These are also referred to as case statements in some scripting languages. The switch statement is useful if you have several execution paths that depend on the same condition expression. Use this rather than setting up long series of if-else-if statements, making your code somewhat easier to read. So with a switch statement, instead of testing a condition for this Boolean value, the switch statement evaluates an expression and uses the result to determine which block of code to execute. So compare this if-else statement with this switch statement. Here are my cases. If it's case 1, page 1, underscore btn, then go to and stop page 1. If it's case 2, page 2, underscore button, then go to page 2, and so on. Here is my variable up here, setting up a string target, and then I'm switching that target right there, and then putting in for the my target this information here based on which case has been met. Notice that the block of code begins with a case statement and ends with a break statement. So we could have used a switch script in our first example using this construction. I didn't do it because I think it's a little bit easier conceptually to understand the if-else statements. This is quite abstract, although once you do understand it, it's much more compact. Compare this script with this one here. You can see it's about half as long. Let's now move on to the next movie and review looping structures.